Welcome to Gamers Garden Retro. I'm Seb and I make videos about retro consoles, arcade games, home ports, cult classics and other odds and ends that interest me. And welcome to episode 4 in my series that looks at every game announced or even mentioned in the official UK Sega Saturn Magazine that would end up cancelled, unreleased or just disappear altogether. Don't get me wrong, this isn't a negative critique. Sega Saturn Magazine is my favourite video game mag of all time, and I still go back and read through its full publication run of 37 issues. And one of the most fascinating things about it now is how many games are reported on that would never see release on the Saturn. Whether it was an in-production preview, an official announcement or just an industry rumour, this makes for an important part of the story of the Saturn's poor fortunes outside of Japan. Before we get started, I suggest making sure you've seen the previous episodes in this series first, and I'd really appreciate a sub if you like the videos. Now let's have a dig through the next few issues of Sega Saturn Magazine. Issue 13 for November 96 has a cover line and huge image of Akuma that announces the review for the highly anticipated home port of Street Fighter Alpha 2. We also have a second cover line and smaller image of Lara Croft for the review of Tomb Raider, the only game in the series that would find its way to the Saturn, and of course it landed here first, slightly ahead of the PlayStation. The contents show that this issue has some great coverage on Virtual-On, Real Bout Fatal Fury, Fighting Vipers and more, with Street Fighter Alpha 2 and Tomb Raider reviewing very well with 95 and 92% respectively. There's an article on Virtua Fighter 3, but only as an upcoming arcade game, so that means issue 13 is our first issue with no mention of any games that would be cancelled. On to the next issue. Issue 14 for December 96 sees another lead image and cover line for Virtua Cop 2, with Michael Hardy appearing by himself this time. The new version of Daytona USA and Quake both get cover lines, and the reviews list makes a rare appearance on the front cover. In a small box on the middle of page 8 is an announcement that the Saturn port of Descent, first mentioned back in issue 7, has been scrapped. Sega Saturn Magazine reports that the developers' efforts to port the PlayStation code proved unsuccessful, and with a bit more digging online, you'll find that the other approach of creating a Saturn-specific port was also dismissed as too much work for a system already selling in low numbers. Not to worry though, as Sega Saturn Magazine also states that more Interplay games are on their way to the Saturn, just like the game below. However, moving down page 8, we find this particular Interplay game is Wild 9, another game being developed for both the PlayStation and Saturn that will only see release on the former in '98. Developed by Shiny Entertainment and designed by Dave Perry of Earthworm Jim fame, Wild 9 was a sci-fi adventure-style 2.5D platformer and had a similar sense of humour to the Earthworm Jim games. A Saturn version was partially programmed and even advertised, and it's been suggested that a Sony exclusivity deal meant this version was dropped. But Dave Perry also suggested commercial viability in North America was an issue, along with the game's late release date of '98, which is more likely. Sega Saturn Magazine report here the game has interactive 3D backgrounds and an impressive 60,000 frames of animation, and it will keep readers posted on the game's progress. Turning over to page 10, Adidas Power Soccer is announced as the next Psygnosis PlayStation port for the Saturn. It was being developed by Perfect Entertainment, the same people who ported Wipeout, 3D Lemmings and Destruction Derby from PlayStation to Saturn, and although it was promoted well ahead of its release, it would end up being quietly cancelled for unknown reasons. Sega Saturn Magazine expressed doubt over how well it would compare to the Saturn's own Sega Worldwide Soccer 97, but we would find out more on its release in March 97. A nice article in this issue can be found on pages 52 to 54 that covers the Christmas bundles available for the wannabe Saturn owners out there, featuring the popular shops of the day where many of us bought our games, including HMV, Dixon's, Comet and Electronics Boutique. The best deal available this Christmas seems to be the Toys R Us offering of a Saturn console, Sega Rally, Wipeout and Virtua Fighter 1 for the tidy price of £197.99. This seems like an amazing deal, but sadly we'll be notified in the next issue that this was a printing error. So scratching that, my pick of the deals for Christmas 96 would have been from Electronics Boutique. A Saturn, Virtua Fighter 2, Sega Rally and a second pad for £250 looks like a good deal to me. That's it for issue 14, so on to the next one. Issue 15 ushers in 97 with a huge pre-rendered image of Sonic the Hedgehog, although this represents the largely underwhelming updated port of the Mega Drive's Sonic 3D. Fighters Megamix gets a cover line, and page 3 details what's in store on the included demo disc, Sega Flash Volume 3. One stage of both Virtual On and Tomb Raider gives you something to dig into, and there's an opportunity to see how the new edition of Daytona USA compares to the launch game, alongside a half match of Sega Worldwide Soccer 97 and some videos of other games. Moving to the news section, we can see a big article on the upcoming Saturn port of the awesome Capcom arcade fighter X-Men vs Street Fighter. But it's in a tiny announcement on the sidebar of page 7 that we receive a first mention of what will become Core Design's Fighting Force. This popular yet middle-of-the-road game had quite an interesting development. Core pitched the game early on as a Streets of Rage 4 for exclusive release on the Sega Saturn. This changed as they decided to develop it multi-platform, with Sega removing the Streets of Rage IP and it eventually released on each major platform except the Saturn. This small piece of news in Sega Saturn Magazine states the connection to the Streets of Rage series and also makes a first mention of the sequel to Tomb Raider being in development. Turning over to page 9, we get an official announcement that Virtua Fighter 3 is coming into homes on the Saturn. Sega Saturn Magazine state here this came from the head of AM2, Yu Suzuki himself. From here we're back into the realm of speculation though, with the often hypothesized 3D accelerator card being mentioned again as a way of boosting the Saturn's power to be able to handle its first Model 3 arcade port. It's through no fault of the gaming press or gamers that we all thought the Saturn might receive Virtua Fighter 3. Sega themselves strung that expectation along for quite a while, although when you consider now how much of a likely technical jump the Saturn Virtua Fighter 3 would be, it's hard to feel that disappointed. Just below the Virtua Fighter article is a mysterious report of Yu Suzuki announcing another AM2 Saturn project, and all he has to say is that it will be as surprising as Fighters Megamix. With nothing else to go on at all, I assume this is actually the first reference to what would become Shenmue. As we know this began development on the Saturn as a Virtua Fighter RPG, we can't know for sure though, so we'll have to piece together any further announcements by AM2 in future issues. That's another issue down, now on to the next one. Issue 16 for February 97 leads with a large centre render of Virtua Fighter's Akira, and there's quite a few cover lines, with the main one being a look ahead at 97. Reviews of Sonic 3D and Bug 2 are mentioned. Street Fighter 3 is revealed for the arcades, but going straight to page 3 is home to one of my most enduring memories from when Sega Saturn Magazine was being published. An introductory letter addresses readers by saying, "Owning a Saturn is making a statement." The writing was on the wall for the Saturn in the UK by the beginning of 97. PlayStation was already outselling Sega's flagship console, and this was before many of the games the console is best remembered for even came out. Sega Saturn Magazine was bold, confident and positive, a perfect fit for a console that only appealed to a certain kind of gamer. But for those who understood its appeal, there was very little else that could beat the best Saturn games. It's a bumpy ride, but UK Sega fans and Saturn players could not have had a better magazine to guide them through the difficult couple of years ahead. The cover story looking ahead at the games of 97 can be found in pages 14 to 19, and although many great games that will be released on the Saturn are shown here, there's also a fair number that won't see release. Next to a very big and racy, high-res render of Candy from Fighting Vipers, the article again states that the incoming Saturn port of Virtua Fighter 3 will alter the perception of the console across the world. The netlink is discussed again as well, with an Easter release date confirmed, but with Easter being right around the corner, no other solid details are here, and we know it would not appear. Turning the page for the bulk of this feature, the first game mentioned is Adidas Power Soccer, covered in issue 14. We know this will quietly cancel for reasons unknown. Moving down the row, there's a box on Dungeon Keeper, an upcoming Bullfrog strategy game at the time of this publication. Dungeon Keeper was in development for the PC, with ports to Saturn and PlayStation, with only the PC version being completed in the end. A sole developer, Carsten Elton Sorensen, was tasked with programming the Saturn version, and had the engine up and running, when it was cancelled, roughly 10% finished. Here, Sega Saturn Magazine state that it's not confirmed, but a Saturn port is very likely. Directly below, Into the Shadows by Scavenger Games receives another mention for the first time since issue 9. This very promising looking adventure style game would not see release on any platform, even the PC that it was originally being developed for, although Sega Saturn Magazine were quite rightly excited for it. Here they say Scavenger releases games when they're ready, and that the gameplay will feel like a mix of Quake and Soul Edge. Moving over to the top row of page 17, there's a box for Broken Helix, an action game by Konami first announced at E396 as Dark Helix. Broken Helix was a third-person game that looks a bit similar to Fade to Black, and first released on the PlayStation in North America in mid-97. The gameplay events supposedly happen in real time, with the story across 4 different plotlines, and was conceived as a first-person shooter before moving third-person. This small box doesn't give us much information on the Saturn port, and it will disappear without a trace soon after this issue, although the PlayStation release didn't review that well anyway, so Saturn owners didn't miss out on too much. After a vague announcement last issue, Core Design's upcoming 3D brawler gets a name further down the page as Judgment Force. Later being named Fighting Force, the Saturn version got quite far through development. This footage is from a Saturn prototype, and Sega Saturn Magazine is quite rightly excited given Core's recent track record on the Saturn and Mega CD. This would sadly be cancelled, likely due to some issues around publishing rights, but we've got more excitement yet to come for this game before that disappointment. Turning over to page 18, there's a box for a Lethal Enforcers 1 and 2 double pack. The first Lethal Enforcers was a 92 light gun arcade game, and ports of both games were released across the SNES, Mega Drive and Mega CD. The use of digitised sprites and backgrounds was impressive in 92, but by now they were both pretty old feeling games. The few words from Sega Saturn Magazine here don't express much excitement, apart from the games perhaps using the Saturn high-res mode, and this would only see a release in the end on PlayStation in late 97. A little lower down there's another mention of Project Overkill, a game we've seen a couple of times already. By now it had come out on the PlayStation, and Sega Saturn Magazine was still expecting it to arrive on the Saturn soon. And another row down there's a mention of Viper. First seen all the way back in issue 7, Viper was a promising if simple looking action game from Neon, the developers of Tunnel B1, and the writers were still looking forward to it as of this issue, along with the very brief mention of Tunnel B2, a game that was perhaps erroneously expected, as Viper effectively took its place when it released on the PlayStation. Covered in the last episode, Sega Saturn Magazine are still quite rightly excited about Syndicate Wars. Already a hit on PC and also soon releasing on PlayStation, it's one of so many games announced as in development for both consoles but will only see release on Sony's platform. As was Perfect Weapon on page 19. Looking like a Resident Evil style game, it had 3D characters over pre-rendered backgrounds, and it lent more into fantasy martial arts type setting. It arrived in late 96 on the PlayStation and was marketed as Tekken meets Resident Evil. The scheduled May 97 Saturn release never happened, but this perhaps wasn't as sorely missed as some others. Just below is a first mention of Shredfest, a snowboarding game that EA had in development for the Mega Drive before shifting it to the Saturn. According to Sega Saturn Magazine here, it was a Saturn first game that would have been ported to the PlayStation, but the small amount I found online about it references a 3DO as being the target platform, as well as the game making an appearance at E395. Although if this really did happen, I still can't find any photos or videos about the development of the game. After what looks like quite a lengthy gestation overall, Shredfest would disappear from release schedules completely. Finally, on the bottom of page 19, and at the end of this looking ahead feature, we have boxes for Virtua Fighter 3 and Wild 9. As I've covered quite a few times, Virtua Fighter 3 would miss the Saturn and arrive as a launch Dreamcast game, and Wild 9 had a lot more development to go before releasing on the PlayStation in late 98. Sega Saturn Magazine briefly speculate on the long-rumoured 3D accelerator cartridge that would have sat in the cart slot on the Saturn and acted as a form of external graphics card. And here the magazine speculate that other games could have used this on release for the Saturn. That 6-page feature looking at the year ahead contained a lot of cancelled and unreleased games. And that's it for this issue. Let's fit in one more before we wrap up this episode. Issue 17 for March 97 leads with a giant image of the rider from Manx TT, with a cover line suggesting that Sega Rally has competition as the best racing game on the Saturn. Further cover lines include a first review for Hexen, and confirmation that a port of the PlayStation hit Resident Evil is coming to the Saturn. The first pages of the news section contain some very interesting articles looking back now, with a confirmation that Lobotomy Software will bring Duke Nukem 3D to the Saturn, and that George Lucas is bringing the Star Wars trilogy back with new special editions. But page 7 has a first look at Abe's Odyssey, the 2D puzzle platform game that would become synonymous with the PlayStation and a breakout hit in its own right. Beginning development in 1995 under the name Soul Storm, GT Interactive acquired the publishing rights, and while in early 97 the game was deep into development for its target platform, a Saturn release was initially planned for late in the year, not long after it arrived on the PlayStation. Apparently Sega bought the rights to produce the game for its console itself, but this never happened and the game never materialised. This one feels like a real loss to me, as I think the first Oddworld game would have found a perfect home on the Saturn. Sega Saturn Magazine are pretty excited about the game in this article and expect more news very soon. Turning over to page 8 is another article on Wild 9, although named Wild 9s here. Sega Saturn Magazine pretty much just expand on the story and background of production in this article, and are clearly very excited to see the resulting game. It's understandable considering this was Shiny Entertainment's first proper 32-bit game, and their previous Earthworm Jim games were big hits on the Mega Drive. We'll have to wait for more news now, but as of this issue, they are still very excited about a September 9th release date that sadly will never come to pass. A couple of pages forward, there's stories for 2 big upcoming games. Resident Evil is confirmed as being Saturn bound, and for the 3rd issue in a row, we have more news on Core Design's Fighting Force, although still named here for the moment as Judgment Force. In this article, Sega Saturn Magazine state the game's prior connection to the Streets of Rage series, and that the Saturn version is looking well ahead of the PlayStation one. They note a similarity to Sega's own Die Hard arcade, and expect it to be a big hit upon release in the summer. Although Fighting Force would end up as a rather mediocre if well-liked PlayStation game, the excitement here is understandable, and Fighting Force's cancellation so far into development on the Saturn is indeed a loss for the console. For the last game in this issue and for the episode, we will jump all the way to the coin-operated section on page 92 for Scud Race. Known also as Sega Super GT in some regions, this was AM2's first racing game on the Model 3 board, and it would become something of a cult classic among Sega fans. This article hypes up the game after its recent exhibition showing in London, and even though Sega Saturn Magazine admits its conjecture on their own part, they speculate that an accelerator-powered Saturn port could indeed appear in mid-98. Now, if history was a little different, it's not outlandish to think that a port of Scud Race could have appeared on the Saturn. Model 2 ports came home with some big downgrades, so a card-supported Model 3 port could have worked as well. Of course, looking back now, that may sound ridiculous, but I think it was a fair speculation to have at the time. And that's all for another episode of unreleased and cancelled Saturn games from Sega Saturn Magazine. These few issues further prove just how high quality the magazine was, but also just how much the Saturn missed out on. Games like Wild 9, Syndicate Wars, Fighting Force or Abe's Odyssey, these may or may not have been your favourite games of all time, but they are indicative of the broad and deep library of games that PlayStation received and became well known for. How could Sega fight this with the Saturn? It simply couldn't. Perhaps a similar video game series on the exclusives reported in Sega Saturn Magazine would provide a flip side of this coin. So let me know if that's something you would like to see in the comments. Thanks for watching this video. If you're following the whole series, I hope you're enjoying it, and please leave a like, subscribe and comment to let me know what you think, and I'll speak to you soon.